in some sense. I mean, certain things which are nice to have can be done immediately. You need not wait for a cycle of a quarter to kind of do the definitions. And you do that constantly. You do that constantly till you get to make sure that your performance improvement opportunities are fully exploited to realize the benefits of the business objectives that you set for yourself. Okay, that's organizational performance alignment. Now, I will kind of take the next few slides as they come, but they are there in the slide deck because we have maybe 5 more minutes to close out. These were just the filler slides in case we ran out of space, but these are all there. And it is going to tell you pretty much the same things that I have told you, which is that there's a close correlation between competency analysis and competency development and the CMMI constellation. And the emphasis is on knowledge, skills, and process abilities. And we go with quantitative performance management, it positively impacts quantitative project management. We saw all that. And organizational capability management definitely impacts organizational process performance. And we understood the impact of having a process context information, which is the workforce capability information. Otherwise, metrics is a waste, right? And then next, we understood that organizational performance alignment happens for a reason in high maturity because of performance management and causal analysis. But you get the workhorse of taking recourse to both proactive and opportunistic improvements. Okay? Now, read up the rest of the content here because it's useful to know that in PCMM, you actually do analysis at multiple levels. We don't stop at the organizational level. The measurement database itself gets enriched. We do it at the project level. And when you take recourse to using PSP, you take it down to the individual level. So individuals start challenging the averages. Why did you set me 10 defects per K-log as the defect density? I can produce 3 defects per K-log. So individuals take down the measures to their own levels of detail. And that's when you get an empowered work culture. Okay, and the reason why this works is because from a sponsorship perspective, the idea behind both high maturity enactments of the CMMI and the PCMM is twofold, which is to ensure minimizing variation and to bring in consistency. And this can happen only when process stakeholders collaborate with competency stakeholders, meaning those who have the reasons to champion the cause of CMMI collaborate with those who have reasons to champion the PCMM. If anything, I think you must at least consider these 5 process areas. There are other process areas in the PCMM which are equally well qualified to address many of the process challenges, but I think these are the 5 sufficiency conditions. What we know from the CMMI, those 4 process areas are the necessary conditions, but these 5 process areas are the sufficiency conditions if you want to sustain high maturity. And it's only when you do this can you get your high maturity rolling endlessly, and it becomes a joy for everyone who is on the ride. Otherwise, it can be a pain in everyone's neck. Okay. With that said, I have a few more slides, but I would urge you to take a look at the presentation deck when it becomes available. Thank you so much for participating. I hope you are now aware that you are unconsciously doing many of the PCMM aspects. May not be to the rigor that I spoke of, but it at least forms an element in the fabric of your process. So take it to the next level of enactment. Okay? Thank you so much. So I have about 3 minutes left for Q&A.
The idea that, you're right, I think CMMI focuses on the process, PCMM focuses on the people. Why do you think that that was the intention?
Well, I think a PCMM, as I was told by Dr. Bill Curtis, who is the author of the model, happened by an accident. He made a paper presentation in one of the SEPG conferences way back in the 1990s, 94, 95 timeframe. And it was called the People CMM. And that paper became a model. And one of the reasons why PCMM was not so heavily hammered on is because you have a lot of humanistic aspects. And unfortunately or fortunately, you may say it is a humanistic model, but humanistic aspects in the organization are alive. They are very much the reasons why we have so many issues, right? So I think One of the resistances is because you don't want to touch on the hot buttons of individuals. Like for instance, competency analysis. If I were to do a competency analysis of a person and say he's only level 1 on knowledge, that might offend this person. In a more nurturing environment, in a more caring environment, where individuals are geared towards competency development, it happens naturally. They'll obviously tell you they don't know anything about it, because that's an opportunity to go for a training class and learn. There are several cultures which are more pardoning of ignorance. There are more cultures that are quite insulated. They don't like to hear the bad truth. And nobody wants to confess that they don't know enough about something that they really have a fleeting knowledge.
So without the people perspective, then do you think the CMMI is really limited?
In my opinion, yes. In my opinion, at all levels there's a gap. They have to plug it with the PCMM framework. Because if you don't engage practitioners, who is going to hold forth for you as the process stakeholders? So at all levels, level 2 to level 5, there are chinks in the puzzle. But the good news is you have the PCMM, which is a derivative of the capability maturity model. And I was actually trying hard to find this book by Tom DeMarco, and it's available here in the store, The Peopleware, and I got it after strenuous searches. This book goes at length about talking to building a sociological system in the organization and less of a process-driven systemic work culture. Yeah, thanks. Question?
Yeah. So if you have a level 5 organization with CMMI dev, but no knowledge of the people CMM, would you recommend to start all over from level 2 of people CMM, or just work on the 5 PAs you just described?
I would say if you are genuinely a high maturity level 5 on the CMMI dev, you would be doing pretty much all of these things, but you would lack the robustness. You would say my defect tendencies is 3 defects per K-log, but for what type of resource mix?
So the organization would just read the people CMM 5 process area and see if they are doing the practices, and if they are missing something, would they have to start from scratch, from level 2, or what would be the possible scenario?
Okay, the possible scenario is twofold. If you have a high maturity appraised level 5 organization, much of the resource requirements are already met, because these are all embedded in your generic practices. But the missing link is what type of a resource mix, what type of a competency profile yields me this process capability baseline. That is missing. So you don't know whether this project team is good for a community race, or they are fit for an Olympic race, or for what purpose. So chances are your risk management is something that you have to weigh very significantly if you're not already consciously doing people CMM. So in the CMMI, I would lay emphasis on risk management, because that's going to be a risky thing, because always estimates are going to be whipped up from the bag, not knowing what competency profiles. And then I would ask you to supplement it with these 5 process areas. Because the rest of it, within the PCMM, starting with work environment, or communication and coordination, staffing, which we touched upon, compensation, these are fundamental. Performance management at level 2, right? And at level 3, you're talking of competency analysis, competency development, then competency-based practices, then you're talking of workforce planning, and you're talking of and so on and so forth, okay? There are 7 process areas at level 2. The thing is, you have to mesh the missing links from your high maturity with what the PCMM offers. And I don't believe that you could just do the 5 PAs of the PCMM and be successful. So you must go back to the level 2, 3, 4, and 5 of the PCMM. You may not have to redo CMMI dev, but you may have to touch upon key elements of what the PCMM has to offer, for sure.
I'll confess, I don't know people CMM. So part of this is hard for me to fully understand. But it seems to me that people CMM takes OT to a far new level.
Exactly, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Organizational training is actually a mishmash of two things, strategic needs and tactical needs. Okay? It doesn't define what is strategic and what is tactical. That's the fundamental problem. But if you take the competency orientation, it makes competency development strategic, because that's the mainstay of your business. You can't say we will have a tactical plan for a strategic component. So you're absolutely right that competency analysis and competency development puts organizational training on an adrenaline rush, so to speak, to get you to start thinking about the real core issues of your organization.
You're just highlighting 5 of the PCM areas. I think most organizations are focused on dev. So when in their dev implementation would you advise that they begin PCM?
My recommendation is start it early, because behaviors take much longer than process enactments. See, changing a person or a group of people's behaviors and attitudes is a much more laborious task. And it's a labor-intensive, nurturing task, so you've got to get the right people to do it. I mean, you can't just take a hammer approach to change all the time. You know, sometimes people resist change. You want to ask them, why do they resist that change? So that takes a little bit of the wind out of the bag already, because you need to kind of have someone who can hold the people dimension for your process program. The PCMM? Well, I think it is twofold. One, my own gut reaction and an answer is that the organizations wanted to always use PCMM as a supporting maturity framework and not do an appraisal, and for reasons best known to them. And the real reason is this, because I was a sponsor of the PCMM, and by the way, we were the first level 2 in the world, IntelliGroup, okay? The resistance is very simple. After level 2, you know what happened? There were headhunters lined up across the street, willing to poach all the ERP specialists from our organization.
Trying to keep your people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and it was, and how do you resist the temptation for someone who says, bring your offer letter and I'll do into 2, right? So that's the key component is you lose your strategic workforce, because you now announced a capability called level 2 or level 3, as the case may be. That's one reason. The second and third and the fourth reason is because this requires a lot of investment. And if you don't consider training as an investment, but you consider training as a cost, you can never get this formula right.
That's it.
Yeah.
And it also requires the buy-in from the HR.
Yes.
It's easier to get a buy-in from the business than the HR. So that's a more confident.
Exactly. Yeah.
But that's exactly what happens to many organizations, even with that. When they get to high maturity, people are out the door because they've got credentials.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's always a difficult situation to ask or answer a question like why PCMM was not well adopted. There were several other appraisal-related things. It was heavy on surveys. Just getting the surveys done was like a 2-month exercise for a medium-sized organization, which is 500 people. So if you run a survey for 2 months for a 500-people organization, imagine the consequences of the cost of appraisal. I would say they should have underplayed the importance of surveys and do the real things like Scampi. Now the adoption may pick up because we don't have anything called as a survey for PCMM. We have Scampi for PCMM. So with the Scampi method, you still have the same type of a profile for Scampi appraisal for the PCMM. Only the model changes. Hopefully, from what I hear, they should pick up traction with the PCMM. Because there is this element of, can we shrink wrap 22 process areas of the PCMM into something like an essence, which will hold meaning to the community? And the answer is these 5 process areas. So just like how the security folks brought in 4 process areas from their security dimension, the other missing link is the people dimension. Bring at least these 5, and then you have the constellation that's going to be robust from security, people, and the systems. And then you have a story to tell.
Well, they always in the history throw a 3-legged stool.
Exactly.
And they focused on one, on the process.
Process.
And the others, they said, yeah, well, okay, they're good, but we got to focus on process.
Exactly.
So and now I can see the importance of what happened when they ignored the people.
Absolutely. your level 5 will be written on vanishing ink. That much I can tell you, because I have seen this happen. You give a level 5,